hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal's power, the secret to consciousness, our existence, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller, not some troubled youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
God's had to build my own family. I hate your son. I hate your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
The Illuminati created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal's power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller, not some troubled youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
God's had to build my own family. I hate your son. I hate your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
The Illuminati created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal's power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller, not some troubled youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
I had to build my own family. I hate your son. I hate your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You and whose army, princess? You and whose army?
What is up, everybody? This is Spook, and this is the Spook live stream. Before I forget, don't forget you can pick up Neofeud on Steam or H3g3mony for the low price of $4.50. If you haven't picked it up yet, if you have been considering it, do check it out over there on Steam or H3g3mony. All the sales do support everything that we do here at the Silver Spook cooperative slash commune, and the creation of Neofeud 2. Of course, making sure the kids have food, the house is capable of housing us, we have transportation and electricity, and the streams keep happening. So if you don't play video games, of course, do consider becoming a Patreon patron or a subscribe, not on Twitch, but becoming a patron. You can give directly through the StreamYards link, and there's also, of course, sharing this stream with anyone on all the various places where people find streams. Yeah, so before I forget, one more little housekeeping thing. I am not going to be streaming that long this morning because we are going to be having a panel discussion. I'm going to be hosting a panel discussion later on today. The sun can't make up its mind whether it wants to be set or, nuclear flash my green screen out of existence. Anyway, I will be having I will be hosting a stream later on today, which will be on the topic of. Let me just find that here. The stream later on today at 7 o'clock Pacific time will be on decolonizing science fiction and reality. It will be featuring, I don't know if you can read all that. Is my face on top of it? Oh yeah, it looks good. It's featuring Babby Goth, also known as Santo Alvaro Ojeda, who is on a couple previous Silver Spook streams, and a friend, indigenous game developer from Paraguay, creator of a lot of very important cyberpunk games, including 1870 Cyberpunk Forever, which is free and it takes 20 minutes. It's like the best cyberpunk game ever created. We'll have Saber at Cybernetics, also known as Saber, African futurist, Afrofuturist, video producer, content creator, and coder, and also was on another one of the participants in the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color's Futurisms panel. So this is kind of a follow-up to that panel that I did earlier in 2021. A few of them that I was doing earlier. And this is kind of like a follow up in the sequence. I might make like a video series of those. We'll see. And then we have Dr. Chris Pye, also known as Kavika Guillermo, who is Filipino, Hawaiian, Chinese, Asian, and Pacific Islander. That was on the recent AAPI panel that I hosted, or Luna Oi hosted, and then I reposted it here. Yeah, so Kavika Guillermo will be there, and of course I will be there. And that's today, 7 p.m. Pacific time. That will be on Twitch, and then I will upload it later to the YouTube channel if you missed it on Twitch for whatever reason. And yeah, so we'll be talking about exploring space without settler colonizing, coding alien and fantasy races without racism, and ditching tired yellow peril cyberpunk tropes for counter-hegemonic cooperation. What the indigenous future looks like. It is Indigenous History Month. Like, I know last night was the AAPI month, and I'm like, Indigenous History Month this month. I'm like, I don't have the spoons and time and energy to make like a whole nother massive giant thread about so I just can reshare the same thread I made last month about the Hawaii thread. That's I'm gonna bookmark that one so that in case anybody asks. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about this is Coyote and Crow, by the way, in the upper left, that you should definitely check out if you're into like indigenous made. It's in a very much indigenous fantasy, future, cyberpunkish tabletop game, I believe. It was Kickstarter recently, so that looks like it's going to be something really cool. Indigenous creators involved in that one. The middle one is the scene kind of in the middle of Neofeud 2 that I'm working on. I just gotta throw it up just because I need something. And the last one is, of course, Wakanda from Black Panther, which is another, in my view, an important counter. We're going to be talking about counter-hegemonic, which goes along with decolonization, but it is a very counter-hegemonic indigenous future in that sense. So we're going to be talking about that. Some of these are less obvious. Some of these questions have less obvious answers. These are more complex, like the how to do space without settler colonizing is one that I'm very interested in discussing, because of I mean, think of The Expanse, think of all these space movies, right? Mars colonization, I mean, in reality, of course, Elon Musk literally, and Elon and Jeff Bezos, right? The billionaires of Earth, not just billionaires, but a lot of people, but there's a few of them that are wanting to go to space. And what does that look like when there is a multi-planetary or multi-star system, multi-sector civilization? So that's an interesting question. How do you arrive? Because one question I want to bring up for this one is, every place where there is human inhabitants, at one time there weren't human inhabitants, right? So at some point people explored, like Hawaiians, like if you watch, well, if you know Hawaiian culture, but you may have picked up on this from watching a Disney movie, which Disney, along with Aulani, has not paid any reparations for appropriating our culture. So I'm still waiting for that Disney multi-billion-dollar massive mega corporation. But I mean, if you know Hawaiian culture or Polynesian culture through Moana or whatever, or maybe you've watched some of these streams, you know that Hawaiians were famous explorers. I mean, they were capable, as was discussed, that they can sail across 1/3 of the Earth's surface, with no tools, with no compasses or anything like that, or chronometers that they used at the time, and get to any countless tiny little islands, like little half-mile wide pieces of land, in just amazing feats of navigation. So they arrived in these places, right? Now, when they arrived in the places, now the place is that settling, right? But it's kind of like somebody had to explore, arrive at this place, and then make a home there, right? Like there's a story of Pele here in Hawaii, arriving in Hawaii from Tahiti, and then making a new home. So what's the difference between that versus, American, Europeans arriving in what they called America, right? And of course, well, somebody was there before, but it's kind of like, like in space, it's kind of like, The Expanse kind of sidesteps that whole question in season 4, where they kind of have, it kind of sidesteps it by going like, it obliquely refers to, you should have let me set up a post office here. Somebody, the more Euro colonizer type shows up and goes, you should let me set up the post office, and then the one bad colonizer gets shot, right? And it's kind of like, well, but then it's kind of like, who's, it's an interesting question. Like, is it only settling if you literally got there first, or is it if you didn't get there first? And if you show up and if you extract resources from the land, is that, how do you extract resources from a land? Like, to what extent of extracting resources and altering the quote unquote natural state of a territory, right? If there's animals in an alien planet, right? Is that also settling? Is that destruction, or does it have to be like in a certain way? I mean, it's a question that I kind of leave it open. I'm kind of talking about it too much here, but I'm going to be talking about that later on with all these folks. And of course, alien races and fantasy races. How do you construct an alien race that, or a fantasy race that isn't just Tolkien, colonial racism, encoding the dark peoples, the savage, going back to the yellow pill, the hordes, the dark peoples, the fear of the eastern and the southern by the western and the northern, right? Not just the fear, and then the domination and the subjugation and the enslavement and the pillaging, right? And so how do you like create these races without them like being coded in the way that orcs, the way that certain alien races, hive mind insect bug peoples, like I've been talking about recently, kind of like as a kind of crypto Eastern, crypto Persian, crypto Chinese Orientalism of space evil aliens, right? The bad ones, right? As a kind of crypto communists, as a bunch of hive mind bugs that are all the same and that are gonna spill in and yellowify, or they're gonna yellow out the whiteness. That's literally a theme that was written about in the early 1900s. The threat of the yellow peril is literally the eradication of, they're gonna breed out the whiteness, and they're gonna infiltrate culturally, spiritually, genetically the gene pool, the pristine gene pool of whiteness. And that's why we have to mass lynch all of these Asians in the Chinatowns across the United States, and so that how do you not recreate that in space? Argo Starship Troopers has it's directly Western chauvinistic, capitalist centered, Greco-Roman, European, British, American whiteness against communist Asian coded bugs, right? That's literally what Heinlein was writing about. He was anti-communist. And so how do you not recreate that, in space? So anyway, that's the thing that I'm wrestling with right now as I'm working on Neofeud 2. And something I want to talk about. But I'm not going to spend all this time talking about that, because that's not specifically what we are talking about today. Sorry, just like lose it. What? Sorry, my other computer is having some problems. So today, but we're going to be talking about this today, but not right now. We're going to be talking about that at 7 Pacific time today on Twitch. Anyways, so what I did want to talk about was I know I say I'm going to talk about a thing and then I don't talk about it. I just talk about the first thing that pops into my head for 7 hours. But no, I'm going to get to it. We're going to talk about counter hegemonic cinema. And specifically, Ollie and I watched this film, The Iron Mask. Before I say anything else, I do recommend you check it out. I really recommend you check this movie out. Every movie that I have watched that has not come out of the United States, Europe, well, I don't watch tons of European movies, but the US, the West generally, its allies, they've been a lot better. Space Sweepers, I'm just gonna throw this out there. Space Sweepers, you can find that on Netflix if you got Netflix. A lot of people have that thing. I would argue Space Sweepers is also very much a counter-hegemonic movie, and it's a partnership between multiple Asian countries, and actually has people from all around the world. Pacific Rim in a lot of ways is also a counter-hegemonic film, but Space Invaders recently came out, and it's a movie that really, you know, I mean, I should probably define what I mean, but I'm gonna just throw all these out there so people have things to watch this weekend if you haven't yet. I brought this movie up before on these streams, so I won't go too far into it. But I mean, I just recommend that one. And what was some other one? Just Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim. I think the first one was better, but you know, and so what do I mean by counter hegemonic, right? Well, what's a hegemon, right? It's a Pokemon that's made out of, you know, very well trimmed grass. That's a hegemon. It's like Bulbasaur, but like rectilinear, and it outlines the fronts of Parisian palaces. It's a hegemon. You know, it's like a hedge, a garden hedge, surrounded by golden fountains, like Princess Sybil's house. Now, hegemon is a leadership or dominance, especially by one country or social group over others. Germany was united under Prussian hegemony after 1871. Historically, in Greece, right? Like you see that image of Greece. Again, hegemony. Again, this harkening back to the previous stream as well. The yellow peril, the West can't escape yellow peril, and Red Scare, as well, which go together. Hegemony is the political, economic, or military predominance or control of one state over others in ancient Greece. Again, so this goes back to the Greco-American, Greco-European, links are very tight. You know, it's the reason why Jefferson built his Monticello and the capital of the United States with Greco-Roman fluted columns. You know, because they share a lot. Hegemony denoted the political military dominance of a city-state over other city-states. And like in this realm of city-states, which not unlike Euro-feudalism, they're not so different. These so-called democracies of Greece and the so-called non-democracies of feudalism. The dominant state is known as the hegemon. In this 19th century, hegemony came to denote the social or cultural predominance or ascendancy, predominance by one group within a society or milieu. Later, it could be used to mean a group or regime which exerts undue influence within a society. Also, it could be used for the geopolitical and cultural predominance of one country over others, from which was derived hegemonism, as in the idea that great powers meant to establish European hegemony over Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So, hegemony, I mean, when we're speaking of cinema film, right, it's a little more soft power than, say, the coltan and copper extraction and U.S. military occupation and wars in Africa, you know, Asia, Latin America, right? But the cultural, the soft power is very important, you know? Sometimes it could be argued even more important than sometimes the hard power. The hard power of course, it manifests and directly impacts everyone's life. But the stories that are told in the minds of the humans that make up the civilizations or barbarisms, in the case of the West, that exist. What the story in the mind, to a large extent, manufactures the reality. Of course, in a dialectical way, the reality then creates new stories. But mass projection of a story, which is what, you know, our favorite, you know, vitamin C intelligence agency loves to create and manufacture through fiction and nonfiction. You know, it really is where the power, a lot of the nexus of power is in the storytelling, right? And I'm reading Dr. Chris Pye's book, Dr. Patterson, or Koika Guillermo's book, Open World Empire. I should just give that a shout out right now while I'm shouting everything out. Open World Empire, which is a book. It's in NYU Press. Which is more about specific of video games, but it's about race erotics and the global rise of video games, and seeking ways to understand video games beyond their imperial logics. Patterson turns to erotics to reinvigorate the potential of passions and pleasures in games. Games vastly outpace all other mediums. So presently, and part of the argument in this book, Open World Empire, is that where 18th century colonialism and 19th century colonialism centered around the primary mode of hegemonic power was books, writing, literature, right? There were no there were barely any, you know, Kino, right? Like in the Difference engine by Gibson and Sterling, you know, in the cyberpunk, Godfather, steampunk, there's barely any image produced. They're just figuring out how to produce images, so there's no film yet for that kind of cinematic hegemony. But there was writing, right? That's what built a lot of the French, the British, etc. The only real, you know, mass-produced, other than like painting, art, sculpture, but you have a lot of writing is where a lot of the power centered. In the 20th century's film, particularly post-World War II, film was really central for American propaganda, in particular, and it remains so. I bring this up often about, you know, the cowboy bootstraps, Donald Duck imperialism, right? Like Sailor, you know, billionaire philanthropist, arms dealer, playboy, which exists to this day. You know, glorifying, you know, Ayn Randian, you know, capital worship, right? Billionaire, arms dealer, you know, the U.S. military weapons, military-industrial complex worship, playboy, you know, misogynistic, you know, douchebag, fun-loving Robert Downey, you know, and it really glorifies all these things. And in the cinema, it still matters, right? That's why I'm talking about cinema today. But this book is also interesting because it kind of adds the layer of video games, and I also include video games, right? Call of Duty, Cold War. Speaking of Yellow Peril, Red Scare, the highest selling video game of last year. Best selling game 2020 is in fact Call of Colonialism. I'm sorry, I always forget. Call of Duty, Cold War. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. So it's literally a game about the U.S. military, industrial complex, right? And bringing back Yellow Peril, Red Scare, Cold War. It's the Yellow Perils, China, Red Scare, Cold War. The second most selling, best selling, Call of Duty Modern Warfare. And then Animal Crossing, of course. But that's a whole other can of worms, and there's a whole book called Carafico, The Race. Anyway, I'm going to be shouting out other people's things all day long. But anyway, there's a lot going on there. But, you know, part of the hegemony in the game world is the games, right? It's not a mistake that the most powerful superpower for who knows how long, hopefully not much longer, and it's the most powerful military under a plutocratic, self-destructive capitalist regime, but still a giant military industrial complex nonetheless, has the best-selling game, you know, and it is a game about bringing back Cold War narratives, and celebration and glorification of the U.S. military, you know. So anyway, so that's hegemonic power as well, and so the Iron Mask. Why is that Iron Mask, right? In the sense of dominating socially, culturally, the rest of the world, internally, right? Maintaining the supremacy of Athens or Sparta, as it might have been, maintaining the supremacy and the ultimate greatness of Britain, Great Britain. It's not just Britain, it's Great Britain, right? It's the Great British Empire, on which the sun doesn't set, right? It's the America, the greatest country on earth, right? American exceptionalism, right? And so hegemony is wrapped up in supremacy, which is very much a Western, a strongly Western concept. It's important that Luna Oi, who is Vietnamese, and I don't think it's only Luna, she says Vietnamese nationalism is different in a lot of ways and it's subtle in a way that it's hard to communicate to Americans and Westerners because they can't understand a non-imperial, non-hegemonic, non-supremacist way of being people, groups, countries, religions. You know, they don't know a non-missionary-dom, right? It's always been Christendom on top of being Great Britain, on top of being the Empire of France, on top of being colonial, right, with its Catholic Church genocide of indigenous peoples in Canada. Why was that? That's because of why is there 215 children's bones found in a school? That's because of the supremacist ways of the Westerner. That's not a thing. Indigenous people don't find 215 bones of each other under each other's. Like the Sioux didn't go to the Lakota and go, we're gonna exterminate you and all your children until you all turn Sioux. If they did, there wouldn't have been 10,000 years of surviving, dozens upon dozens of unique ethnic regions. Like, as an example, we're gonna get to this. China has 56 ethnic regions. Vietnam has different ethnic regions, right? And now they don't experience zero conflict, but the level, the totality, and the dominance of supremacist thought, supremacist culture, supremacist groups that manifest in war and then slavery is much lower in much of Asia, much of the parts that were dominated, right, by Africa, Asia, Latin America. They were just and North Latin America and initially North America. There was just less of that supremacist, hegemonic in the cultural sphere, and then imperial colonial in the just all spheres, right? And of course, war, economics, wealth extraction, and now neo-colonialism under the WTO, IMF, World Bank, blah 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 blah, right? So what is counter-hegemonic cinema, right? Well, if hegemonic cinema is cinema that supports social or cultural predominance or ascendancy, predominance by one group or within a society or milieu, right? A group or regime which exerts undue influence within a society. Counter-hegemonic cinema is that cinema or games or TV shows or books or tabletop RPGs, right? Tabletop RPGs, great, going back to Coyote and Crow, which I lost. Tabletop RPGs which don't give dominance to one group over the others, right? So it's one that it's not about social or cultural predominance or ascendancy. What is ascendancy? It's a nice way to say supremacy, because Wikipedia is also Five Eyes manufactured libertarian Jimmy Wales propaganda in a lot of senses. No, it's about Western white supremacy. They would just say it's whiteness in a lot of ways, but they're not going to do that because they're trying to make sure that white people keep reading their thing and depict Wikipedia as some kind of arbiter of global interstellar abstract universal truth, but it's not. It's Western centered. That's why people like Grey Zone can't edit their own page. Anyways, exploring space without settler colonizing. So counter-hegemonic. So counter-hegemonic. Games do not purport one particular group to be supreme. Now, of course, Coyote Co is representing indigenous people in the future, right? But it's not saying that. It's not saying that and we are the best, right? Like, Coyote and Crow are the best things in sliced bread, and every German needs to worship Coyote, and you should all watch it and you should all love it. And if you don't look like Coyote, if you don't look like a neon-laced indigenous girl, if all the Germans don't grow their hair out to be the German males and masked people need to grow their hair out to be 2 feet long, or you're all lesser people, right? Indigenous people in Hawaiian culture, in much of Turtle Island, long hair is a thing for people of various gender identification, right? Men have long hair. It's a thing that happens in many of these cultures, North and South America, right? So hegemonic would be, well, now you British, if you don't have long hair, you don't get hegemonic would be, if the British don't get long hair like we have, you can't apply for and successfully get jobs. You can't get a high-paying salary. You can't get into universities. You can't get. We're going to ask you to make your hair long, because short blonde hair is unprofessional. In fact, you should dye your hair black. Blonde Germans, blonde Swedes, you should dye your hair black. You should, if you don't braid it, or a hegemonic power would be like everybody, you must be the way Wakanda is, right? So, I'm sorry, blocky Bloomberg skyscrapers, you're all gonna have to make round African-looking buildings, or you're all barbarian. You're savages. I mean, of course, the West is barbarian in a lot of ways, but you're uncivilized until you have these kind of buildings. Bloomberg, Gates, and Mr. Biden, you need to get a fro, otherwise you're uncivilized. It's just unprofessional. Why don't you have an afro? Well, your hair doesn't naturally, go into an afro, a large afro shape. Well, you need to change. You should curl your hair. Biden, Gates, Waltons, Clintons, Bush, Gates, Waltons, in the Kochs and the jobs. If you don't, David Koch, you look so like backward with your straight blonde brown hair. Like why are you looking so uncivilized for? You should get an afro. So that's hegemony. I mean, that's hard to imagine, of course, in our world right now, because we live in a white Western capitalist hegemony. But counter hegemonic means actually accepting a vast array of ways of being, right? Appearances, dress, architecture, social arrangements, political arrangements. Now, of course, not the hegemonic arrangements, maybe not those. So not capitalist, imperialist plutocracies like the United States and much of Europe and the West and the Five Eyes and all their allies. So we don't want, right? That's not because but I mean anything other than that, right? It's kind of like we should allow for those gender expressions, right? For it's Pride Month, for those cultural expressions, those hair lengths. I mean, I don't see why that's such a problem, but those are arbitrary because of the hegemonic supremacist nature of Greek, Roman, British, French for thousands of years, American for 200 something years, and hopefully less than 300, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, and some of other folks around the world, supremacist often for the self-aggrandizement and profit of greedy individual self-interested actors in a Atlas Shrugged sort of sense, which is just an echoing of ancient Greek. It's Atlas. Where did Atlas come from? Right? Who's Atlas? Atlas. Again, this ties are already back when on Ayn Rand, communist escapee who wrote this speaking of hegemony, the Motion Pictures Association for the Preservation of American Ideals, screen guide, which Hollywood followed for the next, and American soft power followed for the next, 100 years. Ayn Rand harkened back to Atlas from Greek mythology, a titan condemned to hold up the celestial heavens or sky for eternity after Titanomachy. Atlas also plays a role in the midst of the two greatest Greek heroes, Heracles and Perseus, according to the ancient Greek poet. Atlas stood at the ends of the earth in the extreme west. So Atlas was an extreme wester. He's like really working out and selling his abs and pec protein shakes, and beef, turmeric, and salt diets on Instagram. Atlas was the ultimate Western, self-interested, crypto bro, Doge debutante, oxygen bar sniffing, Vegas, Jordan Peterson stan. That's who Atlas was. Anyway, so that's deep in the Western mind. And so like counter-hegemonic means like you don't have to be that way. You can be that way. Now you can't like actively harm people. Like we're not gonna. So I can just I don't know, just like torture people for fun. Well, maybe not that one, but I mean, other than that, if you're not literally like hurting people and destroying the environment, let's let people kind of do what they want to do. You want to make love to somebody who is like visibly has the same body parts as you. What's wrong with that? This is why gender fluidity in Hawaiian culture, going back to Pride Month, if you missed this one, this month is Pride Month, and you can learn all about. I'm gonna repost this stream from Twitch probably to YouTube because makes sense for Pride Month. But I did go off about I did discuss how Hawaiian culture was and is accepting of trans, non-binary, and gender fluid people, sometimes known as Mahu here in Hawaiian culture, and how Western colonization tried to force violent cis-hetero patriarchy here. This is Kumuhina, of course, on Mauna Kea, where we had massive resistance against imperial hegemonic United States, and it's backed by the hard power of the U.S. military and police forces that I often discussed, who mass arrested 8,000 of us and dropped bombs all over Mauna Kea while we were 6 miles from the bombs, on top of radiating us and poisoning our water supplies. And so if you want to learn about that, and the leaders of this were, in fact, Mahu, the LGBTQ plus culture, and historically and in the present. And this is an article by Adam Chiavi Manolo Camp, challenging colonial structures of power and gender. So Mahu itself is Mahu is counter-hegemonic. The LGBTQ plus and gender fluid ways of being lead the resistance, right? It's like, again, if hegemonic, right, is that which seeks to social or cultural predominance or ascendancy, supremacy of one group or by another, right? Another form of that is the dominance of straightness over non-straightness of LGBTQ plus peoples, right? You must be straight. Like, you must be Christian, or you are backwards, barbaric, right? You must have short hair as a man, and you can only be exactly a man, which is short hair, you like hot dogs, you do construction work and shooting brown people in the Middle East, and that's it. That's it. If you do ballet, you stop being a man. But then you have no, if you do ballet, if you put on pink in your skirt, you're not a man anymore, and that's wrong, and we have to put you in prison, jail, kill you, literally force Turing to take certain drugs until someone who helped the West win the war against, in the most paradoxical sense, the Eastern Yellow Peril in a lot of senses, and they forced Turing to basically commit suicide ultimately, and it was really terrible, right? And if you don't change, we will engineer it out of you. We will force you into straightness and madness, or womanness, as the case may be. And that's hegemonic as well. You know, Western conceptions of, and that goes for all of it's Europe. That's all of the Christian world in a lot of senses. Well, actually, in all the senses as it kind of stands. That's all of the U.S. That's all of settler colonial locations and a few others. Particularly the ones that are most allied with the U.S. And if you look at a Venn diagram of, if you have all of the colonial places in red by the colonized countries in red, and all of the places that have homophobia in blue, it's a very purple Venn diagram. Places colonized by the UK that have homophobia. It's basically the same thing. And so that is another form of hegemonic power and oppression, is cis heteronormativity against, people just living their lives in gender and sexuality in ways that don't hurt. I mean, as long as you're not hurting other people, right? Now, like, non-consensually. Of course, if you're getting whips in a ball gag and you are extracting rich weeps from your consensual BDSM enjoyer, then that's consensual torture. So that's something different, right? But if you're just like, beating up people because they're gay, like Americans, white people, Westerners tend to do in their extremely homophobic cultures, right? That's hegemonic, right? And so, anyway, so I'm gonna upload that later on. That's separate. But so what is counter-hegemonic cinema? Is cinema that, again, doesn't enforce and doesn't seek to show dominance of one culture over others, right? To show one as better than others. And it's as Luna said, like, we're Vietnamese. We are nationalists in the sense that we love our country, we care about our country, we want our people to be healthy and happy and gain in prosperity. But we don't say that Vietnam is better than all the other countries, right? We don't say, well, we're the greatest country in the world. The UK calls itself, we are much better and greater than African, the dark, lesser countries, and we must civilize them. Mission civiltries, right? That's what the whole thing comes from. The word progressive itself, they use a lot of, like, AOC, the progressives, the squad, the modern progressives, progressing out of darkness. The word progressive comes from hegemonic and colonial ideology, right? That actually a lot of the initial leftist thinkers were steeped in, on top of the center and the right thinkers of Europe, from Montesquieu, Descartes, Voltaire, even Marx, Kropotkin. They were all Horace Greeley, one of the famous, that said, the yellow peril comes out of historically it's much older than that, but in that time the Asians as despotic, disgusting, debased, deceitful peoples is part of what was called progressive, right? In the past, there are barbarous and savage societies that climb the evolutionary social ladder, right? It's kind of taking Darwin's theories and then weaponizing everything, which is part of Western barbarism, right? Weaponizing everything. So we're gonna take this theory of how the iguanas came possibly from other smaller lizards from other locations, and we're gonna make that into something to justify slaughter of millions and billions of people around the world and stealing of all their land and eradication of their cultures and their ways. But anyway, that idea that there's the lesser and then there's the greater, the progression, the quote unquote savage Indians, the savage dark peoples. This is where Tolkien comes in, right? There's a reason why it's the Oliphant, right? The men of the East, right? The dark men of the East, right? As I talked about previously, Easterlings, known as the Swarthy Men, a race of men who eventually populated the vast uncharted lands of Rhûn, east of Mordor and the Sea of Rhûn. So when you go east of Mordor, it gets even more messed up, right? And the seat of evil, right? The men of the East, right? So this Zack Snyder's racism, I talked about that in 300, right? The Western harkening back, at the yellow peril, and that the West cannot escape and must eventually lose to, because anyways. And so the men of the East, right, this all goes back into this idea of like the Eastern, the Persian for the Greeks, the Asian for Europe, and today the Chinese specifically for America are backward, disgusting, all the things that we just said, and that's part of the hegemonic power to this day, that puts another culture as lower, as lesser, communism itself as lesser, and capitalism as far superior. Western liberal capitalist democracy and in neoliberal terminology, far superior to all other ways, as Francis Fukuyama did for his Harvard Palpatine training facilities over there in the Ivy League schools of the East Coast of the United States. It is the end of history, and the only final reigning champion, the only supreme champion of human social, political, and economic possibility is Western liberal democratic, Western capitalist liberal democratic society, right? And economics. And the counter-hegemonic in reality is that what? Well, I don't know. The United States, you're not looking as supreme as you once were in the light of China's in Vietnam as well, but other countries doing, as I often bring up, 200 times or more better at defeating COVID-19 in terms of poverty alleviation, and the capitalism loves Western capitalism loves to pride itself on. We've done such an amazing job. I'm going to turn this off for a second just because I'm not talking about that. Such an amazing job liberating people from poverty, alleviating poverty, these World Bank statistics. If you take China out of it, that's like 75% China, which is what? Eastern, non-white, Communist Party of China governed, actual socialist country, operating under siege by capitalism and imperialism. But it is not by capitalism that the vast majority, if you add up the total people liberated from poverty, it's actually, they said, like in the UK, it's like it was 2% when they modernized, and some people got richer, most of the people didn't. In the US, it was a handful, like 3%, less than 10%, when some people improved. It also must be noted, the UK and the US improve the standings of the middle, the classes. It took a long time to get a middle class in the US and the UK. It took the enslavement and the pillaging of Africa, the slaughtering of indigenous people of North America. So it really, You killed a lot of you killed and de-developed and impoverished a lot of African peoples, a lot of Chicano peoples, a lot of Latin peoples, and a lot of indigenous North and South American peoples and Asian peoples, just to make a handful of middle-class Americans. So it's actually it was a net negative if you add up, right? In terms of it pushed people further into poverty. Didn't really alleviate a lot of poverty, right? China alleviated 850 million people's poverty. It is the single greatest success story of alleviating poverty and raising people's living standards not on the back of enslaving a people, pillaging, half the continents of the world, Africa, North, South America, and Asia, right? And they did it is like leaps and bounds. The socialist Asian non-Western system of China has done basically they were 26% of the world's population when they alleviated that much poverty. It is the single greatest success story of human social, economic, and political life in the world ever. And the West cannot acknowledge this, right? This is why they are the greatest enemy of the U.S. and the Western and the European world. This Western barbarism, because they cannot. If they were to face the reality, they would have to admit that their Western liberal democratic capitalism, guided by the hands of the seats of power in London, Paris, Wall Street, New York City, and in DC, are failures. Right? That the international rules-based order, which is a lie, they can't use international law because they violate international law 25,000 times per day. Every time they start a war and continue a war of aggression, every time they act in colonial stride, every time they continue to commit and back genocides, whether that's in the Middle East, whether that's in African countries, Europe and America, right? They cannot because they are all failures. Compared to China, everything in Europe and the Western world is abject, utter, total failure. If you're talking about alleviating poverty, benefiting people's life and health, not at the cost of other people's life, health, and wealth, and their resources. Socialism is but just far, not a perfect system, but socialism of a variety of Vietnamese or Chinese characteristics, or Cuban characteristics, or Laotian characteristics, in fact, of Hawaiian characteristics, as I go off on often. I have a whole thread about that, right? Hawaii being the most literate, with electric lights in the White House before the United States, with advanced economic development, right? And again, just to go back, since I'm shouting out all the threads today, you can go back and read that one because I don't have time to make a new one. U.S. deindustrialized Hawaii rather than industrialized it. Before 1898, Hawaii had electricity, mass transit, railroads. Iolani Palace had electric lights before the White House. Highest literacy rate in the world, putting Europeans and Westerners to shame by their own admittance, as I often bring up. Kalakaua invented subaquatic vehicles as Jules Verne was dreaming 20,000 leagues under the sea. We Westerners were behind Hawaii. It's not even a huge country, but they were behind Hawaii. We had black and Asian citizens. Again, counter-hegemonic, right? Hawaiians are not superior to Chinese and to African peoples. Chinese and African peoples were equal citizens. They were also equal members of cooperatives. So economics and politics. It's this thing that Western left are only just figuring out in 2020, right? That maybe we need to, Westerners generally, we need to democratize our economics, right? And then also democratize, Richard Wolff is really doing a lot to bring this into the barbarous, diseducated West, right? The idea of worker-owned cooperatives. Hawaiian and Chinese have been doing that for thousands of years. Vietnamese, Hawaiian, Chinese, Maori, the word hui, right? It's an ancient word. It's known to have predated, because why? Because you can find this word separated by multi-thousands of years, China and Hawaii, but it's the same word exists, and in Vietnam, same word. And with modern socialists against the capitalist structures, Hawaii, a socialist, non-white, right, non-hegemonic country, advanced far beyond and educated the vast majority of its people, brought wealth and prosperity equally distributed to the vast majority of its people, right? Not on the backs of another colony like the UK and America did, not on the backs of slaves like America did, not on the backs of Chinese chain gangs, you know, whacking railroad spikes and getting themselves blown up by dynamite on the side of cliffs, you know, in Washington, in Canada, right? Next to all the dead Chinese bones, next to all the dead indigenous bones, not on the backs of indigenous murder, not on the backs of Chinese slave, not on the backs of African slaves, not on the backs of the pillaging of Africa, Latin America, and Asia. The Hawaiians liberated, educated, and empowered, and brought prosperity and good life, universal health care in the 1800s. Americans 120, 50 years later, you're still begging for 200 years later, America cannot even approach the level of life expectancy that Hawaiians had pre-contact. And the universal health care that Hawaiians had pre-America occupation. So the success of these societies, counter-hegemonic, is not even close. And this is why hegemonic films like what? Falcon and the Winter Soldier, right? Captain America generally have to posit America as supreme and guiding the world. Let me see if I have that whole thing about the jingoism of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I don't fucking remember where, but it's on the list of streams. But that's a hegemonic film. Why? Because it. Oh, great! Captain Utopia's the song from Neofeud 2 is playing. Is because those posit America as the salvation. Captain America as the salvation for the world, right? As leading the world, as the greatest, right? And not really giving credence and not really, it is very America-centered. This is why a lot of Americans didn't like Pacific Rim, because it doesn't really center America very much. You know, it doesn't really center what they think is the greatest country on the planet. You know, Anyway, so back to this movie. I didn't even talk about the Iron Mask. But, so why is the Iron Mask counter-hegemonic, right? I know I've been going off in many directions all at the same time, but the Iron Mask is a film in which, it's one thing about it is the way that it's made, and it is, in fact, it's a partnership between Russia and China, it's a film that is filmed in multiple countries. That's a similarity between Pacific Rim, like Space Sweepers. These are films that are filmed with collaborations between multiple countries, and it doesn't necessarily gonna guarantee that it's kind of hegemonic. I mean, you could have a US-UK partnership, right? Vision in WandaVision is British and then filmed in America. That doesn't not necessarily it, but it is a film that is it deals with imperial power. Right, so the main story. Let me get that. The Iron Mask. Let me see if I can get it over here. Also, you want to just on the topic of you want to see a movie with Jackie Chan and Arnold Schwarzenegger playing a British officer, a prison guard actually, but a British guy. This is the only film you're going to be able to see that in. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jackie Chan. And then it also has a variety of other actors. There is a British. What's that? Oh yeah, and Rutger Hauer is in it. So speaking of cyberpunk, all the cyberpunk fans, all the, you want to, the sky above colonial, smothered Britain was a color of television tuned to a dead channel, and filled with the burned, incinerated bodies of all the dead slaves and the dead plague-filled Brits, and Rutger Hauer, is crying tears in the rain, in the acid rain of London's, Dickensian hellhole. That's the one thing that makes Iron Mask. Iron Man is billionaire philanthropist, arms dealer, playboy, plutocratic, military-industrial complex porn. But the Iron Mask, on the other hand. Yeah, it has Jason Fleming, Jackie Chan, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rutger Hauer. Where are you gonna find this kind of cast anyway? And I'm just trying to find. Yeah, in the early 1700s, cartographer Jonathan Green, a British person from Forbidden Kingdom, 2014, is back to map the Russia Far East. He's forced to China, where he confronts the Dragon Master, the Iron Masked Russian Tsar escapes the Tower of London to a Russian ship. So, for one thing, it takes place all around the world, you know, and it doesn't, when it goes to these different places, it doesn't just, you know, particularly the places that have been historically on the other side of hegemony, right? China in particular, and Russia in historically, you know, in this time, like the present of Russia, it's a different, it's a more complex thing right now. But historically, you know, Lenin was the person, Lenin who kind of championed the term imperialism, or, you know, Lenin as one of the leaders of socialist thought and communist thought, you know, talked about imperialism as the highest form of capitalism, capitalism as the champion economic system of Western hegemonic and colonial ways, and neoliberalism, of course, in the 80s, and now what I call neo-feudalism in the 2020s. But you know, the thing that's really important, I feel, about the Iron Mask, and here's Jackie Chan's character. I don't want to play this because I won't get in trouble, but Jackie Chan's character is a I want that longer synopsis. Can I get that? Not the man in the Iron Mask. The Iron Mask. The Iron Mask. The Iron Mask. See, Rotten Tomatoes is Western hegemonic weaponization of overeducated wannabe film snobs whose mommy and daddy are Trustafarian billionaires themselves from upstate New York. That's what Rotten Tomatoes is, and that's why it's never listened to their ridiculous West-centric. Rotten Tomatoes gave a terrible review to Chappie. It gave a terrible review to Riddick, which I have already discussed. Did I discuss it on this? I feel like I've discussed it on this. Did I go over Riddick? Riddick as another, you know, very important counter-hegemonic film, and it gives a terrible review to all the, to me. I mean, never mind the acting and the action and the cinematography and the plot holes or plot donuts that do or do not exist in the film. Never mind that. This is all bogus. This is all nonsense. Film reviews and game reviews are weaponized, overeducated nerd hegemony. That's what they are, and this is full of shit. You can all burn in the seventh circle of Clint Bush's torture dungeon that he has because he's a Westerner. Anyways, bizarre. Let me just see what they said about this. Now I want to see what these clowns have said about this. They haven't said anything. Why? Because well, there it is. Okay, I wouldn't say you have to have seen the first installment to enjoy it. In fact, the unfamiliarity with the general concept of cinema would probably help, if anything. The unfamiliarity with bogus rubrics constituted by elitist, Western exceptionalist film snobs who watch too much Hitchcock and masturbate to Here's Johnny, which is full of misogyny, anti-indigeneity, hocus pocus savage Indian tropes, and you film snobs should go get a life, or well, I mean, just sit and cry in your dying U.S. empire with your 600,000 COVID deaths and your collapsing infrastructure. That's what you film snobs can do. That's what you can do. At least 2/3 of Iron Mask is funny on purpose. The rest, however, is dragged down by what is this? This is useless clownage. People don't watch movies like that. You know, nobody says that about Captain America. Nobody says that about these movies are as. That's one of my major points is people use the quality of a film. It drags here, inconsistent there. Nobody cares how consistent or inconsistent Transformers or Iron Man or Infinity War. Infinity War is like 50,000 different quantum handwavium plot holes being snapped. Thanos snapping their fingers out of 50 different dead ends and loose ends by just going, well, that was in a separate universe. 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 And we have 25 different realities with Ant-Man splintering down into the subatomic little quarks. And then coming, it's. I could make the same argument that Infinity War is the most discombobulated, the most incoherent, the most off the wall, broken, and just completely copped out because Captain America is the world's cop, obviously. Iron Man funds the police and the military and kills George Floyd. So cop out. Infinity War and all Avengers movies are a cop out in that sense. But also it's a cop out because you're just tying up every one of these runaway scenarios with, well, that'll happen in another universe. Well, that'll happen in another quantum reality. Well, that's another I time travel and fix that. I time travel and fix that. It's why I don't put time travel to the very end of Neofeud, because time travel is the ultimate cop out. You can fix any plot hole with time travel. Not that people care about these plot holes, really. They don't care about the plot holes. Plot holes are used by film critics that apply at NYU, at Reuters, at IGN, at these fancy in the tastemaker influencer CIA-funded Wurlitzer jukebox that is the fictional and non-fictional news and reviewing, so that people watch or don't watch their soft power hegemonic bullshit like Captain America, billionaire philanthropist, arms deal playboy, play Mass Effect, which is about being the space police and the space U.S. military and killing and imprisoning people. Unlike Riddick, which I'm gonna find Riddick because this is important. Riddick got terrible reviews from the U.S. and Western-centric, cinema. And to me, it's better than Mass Effect. It's better than Star Wars because George Lucas is a coward who ostensibly was making a commentary on Vietnam War and anti-colonial, anti-war, but he absolutely did not say anything about it. So 2004, and he's made $7 billion and worked with the military-industrial complex, which because he worked with Disney for the last multiple decades. And that's why Star Wars, I use Star Wars as a metaphor, but it's not. To me, counter-hegemonic. If it was, the U.S. would have banned Star Wars. They wouldn't have given it 25 different movies and let Lucas spend ungodly amounts of time and editors' work hours re-editing his Who Shot First, Guido or Han. So, in my view, and last time I talked about Colonizer Simulator, StarCraft is an ultra-hegemonic game about Yellow Peril with space communist bugs and America saving the universe with Jim the Cowboy Settler Colonial Raynor going to Char and slaughtering all the indigenous people. Disgusting, sickness-inducing bugs. So these are hegemonic games that mostly come out of the West. Where is my Riddick? I gotta find this now. Now I'm getting all irritated at all these films. I should have not have looked at that film, but here. Riddick, there's actually a lot of similarities between Riddick, Escape from Butcher Bay, and the Riddick films and Pitch Black, in the sense that who is centered? The prisoner is centered, empathy formed with, made to form empathy with that character. The non-white prisoner is sympathetic. The police, right? Who's doing the murder and the killing and the thieving and the rape in the United States? The police in all three categories disproportionately than the average citizen, right? Who's doing the killing, right? So Riddick is counter-hegemonic. The universe, it's Pitch Black in particular, and this game, which I recommend, is counter-hegemonic because it centers the prisoner and it makes the police look not terrible. It makes the police look like what they are, which is slave catchers. And that's the modern slave catchers of the police locking up disproportionately black people in prisons, right? And so that's counter-hegemonic because it's being honest and it's revealing it's revealing. Oh, I did do a stream about this. Yeah, Riddick is revealing the hegemon for what it is, right? The Riddick universe is better because it centers space prisoners and craps on space slave catchers and space world police / space US military, where Mass Effect glorifies the space police. This is why there's a whole Polygon article about maybe it's time to abolish the space police. Hey, that's like 20 years too late. Guess when Riddick was abolishing the space police in the noughties. Before it was cool. Not that there's something particularly, not to gatekeep everybody, but I'm just saying that 2020 and George Floyd and 31 million people coming out for Black Lives right? And now you're saying it. You're late to the game. Riddick was way early on this. Riddick universe is better. You know, and it's also, Riddick is also counter-hegemonic. Again, if hegemony is what? Social or cultural predominance or ascendancy, supremacy of one group within a society or a milieu over others, exerting undue influence within a society. Riddick is also counter-hegemonic because why? Because it humanizes a multicultural Helion. This is a quote from Riddick. Helion is home to many peoples of many cultures, and we manage to coexist in peace, united by a purity of spirit. Imam, one of the most likable characters in Riddick, a black Muslim, kind of like coexistence before U.S.-backed intervention in Palestine, kind of like the coexistence of Native Hawaiians, sorry, I don't have that one, Native Hawaiians with Chinese and African peoples who were all citizens and equal, right? Native Hawaiians, Chinese, Africans, former slaves, freed instantly upon arrival in Hawaii in the mid-1800s when America had black slaves, when the UK was pillaging Africa, when all of Western Europe were enslaving Chinese, when Canada was chaining up Chinese to make railroads on the dead bodies of indigenous children. Hawaii had full citizenship for all people. And Riddick is counter-hegemonic because you will never find this. Captain America does not humanize the Middle East. You go to Libya and you don't see any Libyans in Falcon and Winter Soldier. And America, and it whitewashes and propagandizes and is fake rehabilitation of America's horrible war crimes in Libya. The bombing into the Stone Age and the making of slave markets where there once was universal health care. Another country, like Libya. Another example, universal health care, mass education, mass empowerment and using of the wealth, you know, for masses of people in an African country. What did America do? What they did to Hawaii. But even in the war, even worse in a lot of ways. They bombed that country into oblivion. And now there are slave markets, poverty, ethnic strife, warfare. It is a disaster, right? And it's an African country with many Muslims. Palestine was a place where many different people, like the Chinese, Hawaiian, and African, were coexisting. Palestine, they were coexisting Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Helion is like it is an encoded. It is a sci-fi. This is I think Riddick is an example of what does decolonized space look like. I think it's an example. That's why I use it as a jumping off point for Neofeud 2. Right, when we're talking about decolonized space, it is a non-hegemonic, non-colonial space because there are it shows a peaceful existing, multi-ethnic, multi-religious place, and importantly, in a time in which the United States was gearing up for its forever wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, 7 countries, 7 years, with the neocons and the neolibs, the Western American consensus of the Democrats and Republicans over forever warfare in the military-industrial complex. And in this time Riddick came out, it was so important. Let's look at what the imperial cultural rag of note Rotten Tomatoes has to say about Riddick. I bet it's going to be something terrible. Why? Not because Chronicles Riddick, not because the movie is bad or the movie has plot holes and is all over the place, is a hot mess, or whatever highfalutin NYU speak they're going to throw at it. No, the Chronicles of Riddick was panned. I posit. Well, the audiences are okay. The critics not so much, right? They pan it. Why? Because it's counter-hegemonic. Because it humanizes a Muslim and a black Muslim and a coexisting Middle Eastern Palestine or pre-U.S. intervention Middle Eastern country with coexisting Muslims, Christians, and Jews as sympathetic, as a good place, new Mecca. It's space Palestine pre-U.S. backing a genocidal settler colonialism, right? And that's why I think, I don't even know if the critics realize that's why, but that's what, because they went to an Emperor Palpatine imperial training facility called Harvard, called NYU. called Yale, called Princeton, called MIT, right? And then they got out, and what's their job? To be Larry Summers, who everybody's the literal dark prince of neoliberalism, as defined by Yanis Varoufakis, a noted Greek internationalist leftist. They're too busy being cinema Larry Summers, managing global plutocracy and neoliberalism, right? In the soft power realm of film, games, TV, entertainment. Entertainment is the most powerful form of storytelling and education. More people will watch movies than read their history textbooks. If anybody reads in the United States that isn't on the New York Times Imperial bestsellers list. Captain America, I just want to see what they're going to give it. Oh, look at that. Captain America, 80%. Captain America, right? In my mind, all of the Captain America films, all of the Avengers films, they're no better or worse. They're no more or less entertaining. They just have a lot more white guys, and they center the United States. They center the United States military and its Western capitalist liberal democracy in Captain America with his star-spangled underpants, and they center it in Silicon Valley nerd surveillance capitalism and American collaboration between the STEM fields, tech, big tech, and Wall Street in capital centered, headquartered in something like Elon Musk in reality, and the military as he's a literal arms dealer, right? And so this movie is celebrated not because it's not any better or worse. Things blow up, people punch, nobody acts, as Taika Waititi points out. Acting is just saying words convincingly into a camera. It's not and action movie acting is basically just motion modeling. If you're really gonna do something dangerous, the action and the stunts, you're gonna get a stunt double to do that. It's just being white in front of a camera, and then your face being extra chiseled white man, Clint Eastwood coded and Western blue eye coded, right? That's all it's literal. It's cinematic eugenics. That's what America does, right? There's no skill involved in any of this, really. Let's be really real. Chris Evans, the guy who plays Captain America, literally makes fun of this in Scott Pilgrim, right? A satirical comic based off of Canadian writer, but he literally makes fun of himself in Scott Pilgrim, where he plays a pretty good actor who is a pretty good skateboarder. He literally is mediocre at everything. Like Chris Evans is a mediocre actor, and that's fine. He's not. He is no Hakeem. He's no Denzel. He's no Chadwick Boseman. He's not like stage actor. You might have to actually do a little acting when you do, just like some like plays and such, because you're not relying on trillions of dollars worth of explosions and Thanos' pecs being rendered to molecule accuracy by hordes of sweatshop people in third world countries that Hollywood is, subsidizing its work to, or outsourcing its work to. But in Hollywood cinema, you don't have to act. You just stand up and, you gotta do enough CrossFit and workouts to make your body look like a Dorito, I guess. That's a little bit of work, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Captain Star Spangled Underpants, White Surfer Dude Thor, But other than that, there's not, the purpose of the cinema is to glorify America, the military, Western capitalist democracy, to show the West as defending the universe and the world, and it succeeds at doing that, and that's why it gets to 80% from all of these people with PhDs in Alfred Hitchcock and in spaghetti westerns, and other nerds who make a lot of money, doing neofeudalism with academic characteristics, which is what the university system is. It's called giving all the right professors an ass licking with footnotes, and then you get a degree, which gives you the certification to go talk about entertainment, mass propaganda, to talk about hegemony, and direct the masses of people who don't just waltz in and get a tub of $20 popcorn and a tub of and a giant high fructose corn syrup and red dye filled sugar water for another $20, and then drink it in a cinema that you can't go to because America is an abject failure in dealing with COVID-19, and also in making movies that anybody wants to see anymore, apparently. I haven't talked about this film much. Anyways, but you know, so counter-hegemonic cinema. Let's talk about so the Iron Mask, right? Why is it counter-hegemonic? This is like a long preamble, and I gotta get off soon because I'm not gonna stream very long. But it's been about an hour, so I do want to talk about the Iron Mask. The Iron Mask is counter-hegemonic. I should not read any more reviews from Western reviewers because they're just piss me off. And I'm gonna be off topic. But anyway, the Iron Mask is counter-hegemonic. Why? Because it depicts historically the victims of hegemony, right? Asia in particular, China in particular, but to an extent, Lenin's Russia. It begins in a prison, right? Let me see if I can find that Iron Mask. It begins in a prison with Jackie Chan in chains. As you can see here, Jackie Chan in chains, right? And it begins before that with the legend of the Dragon of China, and how China, it's so well told. I cannot really tell it properly here, and I cannot find the synopsis. Can I find it? Let me see. Iron Mask storyline. Can I get that? No, the Iron Mask, not Mr. Heartthrob from the 90s. You know. Not the man in the Iron Mask, the Iron Mask. Okay, no, I want the whole plot. I want the whole thing. No. I can't find it. Yeah, I can't find it. Oh, here. Okay, here it is. Here's something. Okay, here we go. A 350-year-old French mystery has been unmasked. In his new book, crap, this is not it. Okay, I can't find the synopsis. Okay, never mind. I can't find it. You know what? Just go watch this movie, okay? Is it on Netflix? It's on Hulu. It's on Hulu. I'm sorry. The Iron Mask is on Hulu. But let me briefly summarize. So, in the colonial era, right? The Iron Mask centers on Jackie Chan in the beginning. In this legend of China, in which China was prospering, was doing well, and it fell into a time of a time of peril, in time of difficulty and struggle. It's very much symbolic of the history of colonization of China. You know, the Opium Wars, the West coming and pillaging China. Let me get some of that actual. Find some of these dates. China colonial era. Colonialism in China initially started only a few treaty port areas during the 1840s, gradually expanded over time. Impact of colonialism in China. I'm trying to find something that isn't like, okay, I don't need this whole essay. Western imperialism in Asia generally, right? Refers to Western Europe and associated states, Russia, Japan, and the United States as Asian territories. Originally in the 15th century, search for trade routes to India and Southeast Asia led to the Age of Discovery. The age of colonialism is another a way of thinking about it. Early modern warfare, what Europeans first called the East Indies and later the Far East. And so, you know, let me see if I can find the part about China. So China and their acquisitions would gradually suppress that. So French established settlements in India and trade with China, and their acquisitions would later surpass that of the Dutch. The 7 years. This is mostly talking about which of the Western colonists were doing better at impoverishing, enslaving, roofing, in using the opium trade to drug up and dispossess the entirety of China and much of Asia generally, right? And so the colonial period was just really terrible for China. They suffered greatly. They were called the sick men of Asia. They suffered and then they were blamed. You know, black on black crime. You know, that is that is very much that does not originate necessarily with liberal and Republican American politicians, you know. This idea of, well, the black people, they're all just on drugs and they're all killing each other. They're all picking up their AK-47s and shooting each other. The police are just cleaning them up and putting them in their natural state, which is in prison, putting out our wildfires, making our vegan and non-vegan Whole Foods goat cheese for 25 cents an hour. The natural state is to be slaves, because without slavery, they're all just killing each other, right? And that idea of like these are backward, savage, you know, peoples applied to Asia as well. And they said, Marx actually said, and I brought this up before, I know, but Marx literally wrote, the Chinese, it would seem, needed their opium addiction. They needed their stupor to finally, their drunken stupor, referencing the opium epidemic in China, put there by colonial West, to rouse them from their hereditary stupidity. So Marx actually, Karl Marx even, and he was on the far left edge of the spectrum of the West in that time, right? There were much worse opinions on China at that time. Marx said, like, you know, that it was their genetic stupidity. That is why they are in this terrible situation that they were in, you know? Blaming them for their own problem. Like black people are in the situation they're in because they are genetically stupid. Just, you know, it's the same thing. They're genetically barbarous, you know? And it is up to us to civilize them. Mission civil tris, right? We will bring the greater systems to them, you know, like slavery, right? Now, the doublespeak is like the level of hypocrisy in these colonial and ongoing discussions, just like in the black on black crime, are astronomical, right? Of course, like, well, if you had an impoverished, you know, that's the major point of Neofeud, which is that the wealthiest and the richest and the most powerful, the Clinton, Bush, the Gates, Walton, the Ghost Jobs, and now the Musk, Zuckerbergs families in Neofeud, my video game, are some of the most mediocre and useless, and not stupid because of hereditarianism, but because they are. Elon Musk is an idiot who says that COVID-19 will be solved in April 2020. That I will defeat COVID-19 with 2 broken sleep apnea machines, and that the universe. The sun will go into red giant star life cycle in 500 million years, just off by a magnitude in ostensibly his area of specialty, which is what? Cosmology, space, multiplanetary civilization, colonization, right? And he is not as Marx said about the Chinese, hereditarily stupid. I don't believe that. I believe that he is unskilled and stupid in space science, in dealing with pandemics, in most things that he attempts, and then he utilizes the expertise of more skilled individuals because of Western socio-political and economic structures, which grant maximum power and privilege and control over societies to hereditary, dynastic oligarchies, and the richest and the most powerful and the whitest and the straightest and the manest, cis white straight dynastic landed aristocrats like Jefferson was, who are, because of their inherent privileges, not skilled as somebody who, in order to survive, right? The African or Chinese, and Donald Trump even recognized this, that he hired a woman to be the lead architect and designer of his Trump Tower. Why? Because he knew that women had to work and be 3 times as good as any man at developing and building and doing the actual work. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive. Because why? Because tacitly admitting and implying that the Western world is dominated by mediocre, or not because they're genetically, people who have a penis have low melanin counts and happen to be born unto useless oxygen thief clowns before them. Not because there's something genetically wrong. It's just that they have been born into a terrible Greco-Roman, British, French, American structure of Western liberal democracy, you know, the pursuit of rational self-interest under a fictional democracy that is always an oligarchy of wealth and dynastic privilege, which is what Greece was, full of slaves. And that's just a terrible way to run societies, you know? And so, and so these, but they make these narratives, these Western societies that are abject failures at anything but pillaging and stealing other people's ideas. Like the Enlightenment is a word that comes from the East. It comes from Asia. Buddha, right? And Chinese has its own idea, not just the word, but the entire concept of it was all stolen, and there's never been any enlightenment in the West. They also anarchism and socialism and communism, these ideas that propagated, and many people sold many books in London about these theories, were also actually stolen and borrowed. And you can look at Tale of Twin Rabbit for that from indigenous people. The leftist ideologies of communism, all these things were basically lifted wholesale from indigenous Turtle Island First Nations people of what calls itself America, specifically Iroquois, but not exclusively. I would argue Hawaiian as well. And so, anyways, again, this is not to say there's something wrong with that. This is not. It's the culture, it's the way of being, it's there, and the ideology, right? And so, and so going back, I keep going off with Iron Mask, but I mean, but that's an important preamble, because why the Iron Mask is kind of hegemonic is because the main character in it is an Asian, Chinese specifically, right? And it counters that history of lies about China, right? Of this racism against China. It depicts the under Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Who is for the first time, or maybe not the first time, I don't know. I haven't watched every single one of his movies. But it shows, let me see if I can find that. It shows the British as a slave driver, as a colonial leash holder of the Chinese, right? Metaphorically in the tower, I mean, literally, there are Chinese slaves, there are Chinese prisoners being just held in terrible conditions, right? What the West likes to call human rights violations, right? In this prison in London. London itself is not an attack on London. London was full of smog, full of grossness. It's a realistic depiction of London. And I don't think it's a mistake that this is a film that's not made in London. It's made by a Russian company in collaboration with the Chinese and other international, multipolar as opposed to unipolar or unilateral direction, production, and funding, right? The Iron Mask, and London is depicted honestly in the way that Riddick depicts the United States Empire honestly, as space Greco-Roman and Western coded mass murderers coming to blow up a peaceful coexisting Muslim society in Riddick, right? And so the Iron Mask similar to Riddick, right? This is the way that Western coded, it's like the Greco-Roman armor, right? It's like Spartan armor with American assault rifles in space, right? And the way that they're coded and the way that they're very much neocon, and neocons were leading in this era of the Bush, the Cheney, the Colin Powell, and all of their Rumsfeldian, not Roosevelt, they're two different imperial colonizing mediocre white guys, but Rumsfeldian policies, particularly in Iraq, particularly in the War on Terror, right? And so this film depicts America's imperial barbarism honestly, and Western barbarism honestly. They slaughter people in the Middle East, like bombing in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, right? That often bring up, and the blowing up of the preschools in Yemen, the blowing up of Pakistan wedding parties, everybody terrified of blue skies in the Middle East. And they depict that in the era of the United States beginning of its forever wars, when it is most impactful, Now, unfortunately, most movies were not Riddick. Most movies were more like Mass Effect, glorifying America's world policing of the galaxy in Mass Effect, and the U.S. military policing the Jihad, the Al-Qaeda, space Al-Qaeda, and putting down any place that wants to go against American Western capitalist interests. And Riddick shows it honestly. It says this is what the West is. It goes and it blows up peacefully coexisting, disproportionately non-white, black, Muslim, multi-religious places with a again, it's important. The necromongers, like the United States, is uni-religious. It's unicultural. It's monocultural. It's monotheistic. You must be of this religion or you are slaughtered. You must be of the U.S. military or you will die. Kind of like teachers, nurses, and doctors and social workers who are starving in their homeless tent cities with college professors rationing out cans of tuna fish. To this day, tens of millions about to be evicted very soon by the United States. The only way to live in America is to join the U.S. military. Do you want $160,000 a year? Become a programmer for Predator facial recognition systems. Go shoot people in a Marine outfit in the Middle East. Or do arms dealing for Lockheed Martin in Aspie in Australia. Right? Literally, America is still the necromonger. So this is an honest depiction. This is why Riddick got 20% from critics. Because it depicts the West honestly, depicts Western imperialism and barbarism honestly. That's why it's counter-hegemonic, and that's why Iron. That's the same reason why, anyway, if you disagree with me, that's fine. Iron Mask is counter-hegemonic because it depicts Britain as the place of the slave house of nations. This is why Arnold is depicted. Like, I'm trying to get some images, but Jackie Chan is the Asian chained up by Western imperialism. Right? Roofied, pillaged, called the sick man of Asia, blamed for their own oppression. The same way that Americans blame black people for their own oppression, black on black crime, you're all druggies, right? Blaming the Chinese for being drunken on their own opiates that they are putting there, the Westerners, intentionally, right? And so this film, the Arnold he's not necessarily depicted as super evil, but the meta story around it, which is more important than what the story is about. The story, whatever. But the meta story of this entire thing, and also in Russia as well, as a place, also. Now there's a lot of historical play that's happening here, but metaphorically, the West is also putting down Russia, the people, and causing suffering there, which is the case. The West, as a Western capitalist imperialist place, has historically, particularly when they try to do socialism, backed capitalists, the white army. They backed invasions, they've backed civil war, they have backed the suppression. If the thing is, there's a lot, the Soviet Union has a complicated history, but if Western imperialism, if Western capitalism had not put so many trillions of dollars, so many millions of soldiers and lives and funding of militarization, of ringing the country in, of Russia, I don't think that they would have the level of, they wouldn't need the level of military and expenditures on things that they wouldn't have liked to expend on if it wasn't for the Western oligarchic, right? Hereditary, dynastic, white, cis, straight centered, so-called democracy under capitalism, Western liberal democracy, trying to shove down Russia's throat its ways for the benefit of its feudal oligarchs and its capitalist oligarchs. In a system that has not really changed. That's why Neofeud is called Neofeud, because it's not, feudalism didn't go away. It just put on a mask, and it got a throne of dollars instead of a throne of jewels and blood dynasty and red carpet, right? And so that Western feudal capitalist merger of America, Britain, in a lot of ways, and Europe generally, pushing back into a place that had undone its feudal SARS. And I feel like in a lot of ways the Iron Mask is a Russian and Chinese, because it is hearkening to a history of attacks on left, attacks on actual communism, attacks on equality, attacks on the on Easternness. Much of Russia, it should be clear, is not viewed as Western, right? I mean, it's like most of Russia is in Asia, right? And so in that way, the Iron Mask depicts honestly, right? It depicts honestly, to me, like in a dialectical historical way, not perfectly. I mean, I'm sure you could make articles. Also, Tywin Lannister, right? the guy who plays Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones, depicts one of the British lords in this film. That's just incidentally, but you know, and so the chaining up of London symbolically, and the people do become sick. They lose the healing tea given by the dragon in China, and the dragon symbolizes the people. At the end of the film, like Jackie Chan is standing next to Arnold, and Arnold's like, I came all the way from Britain to see the great dragon. Where is the dragon? And Jackie Chan tells him, you know, after he's finally freed from his chains, right, which is symbolic of China freeing itself from the Western imperial chains in the 2020s, right? Well, I mean, really throughout the 20th century and now in the 2020s, with revolution and then ongoing trying to get out from under this colonial structures, right, in a variety of ways that you could argue you could have done it better or worse, but who are you to judge from the West how people liberate themselves? If you are yourself an oppressor nation and a member of an oppressor nation, and so Jackie Chan's character at the end, you know, as kind of more liberated, almost like a symbol of like where China is today versus where it was 200 years ago, says, no, the dragon is not some great beast that defends China. The dragon is the land, it is the mountains, it is the sea, it is the sky, it is all of the people. The dragon is all of our people. The dragon is our great 4,000-year civilization state. The dragon is all of us, right? The dragon is that which has liberated 850 million people from poverty. The dragon is that which is the headquarters of 50% of all of the solar in the world, Xinjiang specifically. The dragon is that which has brought high-speed internet, has brought high-speed 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, has brought the greatest success story of empowering people without hegemonic colonizing of other people in the history of planet Earth, far in excess of everything that the West has ever accomplished. It can be argued that the West has accomplished negative empowerment. If you add up the middle-class livelihoods of a handful of Western Europeans, Americans, Canadians, and some Japanese people, and a handful of Indian people, at the expense of so many others, it could be argued that the West has created total net negative quality of life improvements. And so this is a counter-hegemonic film because it doesn't center Captain America, which does not lie about the salvation that Western capitalist democracy brings. It is honest about the colonial era in a very and it is sometimes historical, but I would argue it's more important as a metaphorical. The British chaining up the Asian in the prison, you know, and then the liberation from that, right, through a struggle, and also the duplicity of those who were operating in parts of China on behalf of their colonial oppressors, right, who had to be overthrown. It is a revolutionary story. I'm reading a lot into this, but a lot of this is under the surface. But the big story in it is that the Russian peoples, the peoples of Russia, and the peoples of China, downtrodden under a Western imperial colonial hegemonic power, come to finally, liberate themselves against a Western force. You know, that's kind of the ultimate story. And it doesn't necessarily say that everyone in China is good. There are some people in China, they go to China and they do a lot of fighting there. I can't find the pictures that I want to find of this. Let me see. Iron Mask. There's one where he there's a scene where Jackie Chan's imprisoned Asian character literally breaks the chains, right? And Jackie, it's important too, is that the Chinese in the Iron Mask, it's not that Captain America doesn't come to the tower in London, right? Come to the prison house of nations of the UK and the West and break the chains for Jackie Chan, for the Chinese, right? This massive prison, and there is a Russian prisoner with his mask on, and then a Chinese prisoner being held in terrible conditions, being abused, right? And it is not Captain America, it's not an American, it's not a British, it's not anybody who comes and frees the Chinese from the chains. It is it is the Chinese themselves. Through his own empowerment as the dragon in China, like it kind of cuts between the prison in London, right? Kind of like the Asian experience in the West versus the Asian experience in China. And as the dragon is liberating itself, right? As China is liberating itself in China against the duplicitous puppet governments under a colonial structure, against the sickness that has been put there, not the Chinese people's fault that they are in a drunken stupor, right? But it is at the same time as China is liberating itself, the Chinese prisoner breaks his own chains. And like, to me, that was such a powerful metaphor for the truth of the path towards actual enlightenment, the path toward actual civilization. It is not America saving Libya, as in Falcon and Winter Soldier, right? It is not America saving the world. It's not saving anything. It's destroying the world with the single largest carbon emitter, the U.S. military. 100 corporations emitting 70% of the emissions from Wall Street. It led in a vaccine apartheid. It leads in inequality. It leads in racism. It leads in ethnic and racial inequality. Look at the George Floyd uprising. Look at the history of racism, slavery, and neo-prison slavery. Look, America does not lead in social, political, economic, and technological realms like it says. Captain America is a lie. Every American movie is a lie. Mass Effect is a lie. Marvel is a lie. All of these are lies because you're making movies in the Death Star and you're calling the Death Star the force of liberation. Star Wars could have been a good movie, but it doesn't make it clear enough what the enemy is, and everybody interpreted the 1970 Star Wars film as the Soviet Union is the empire. Partially because of the way things are coded, in the way, not necessarily because everybody is goose-stepping in that way, but people think of communism as people in military uniforms, in monocolor, everyone the same military uniforms, goose-stepping in that way. That is the internal coding of communism to the United States citizens. And so that's the way that Star Wars is read, right? To have an honest Star Wars, you need Emperor Palpatine eating hot dogs and wearing Nike, right? And that's where Neofeud 2 comes in. And that's where, at the least, in the way that Riddick, Riddick doesn't necessarily code the Necromongers as wearing Nike, playing with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles while they're blowing up the sunshine in space Middle East. But they are more Euro-coded, and they have American-style guns. And they kind of spew American-style religious rhetoric, right? Like, you convert, like they're very missionary-like, right? Where the Muslims are depicted the Muslim, Eastern, Middle Eastern, and African peoples are depicted as coexisting. The Western, Euro-coded are depicted, but Star Wars to me doesn't cut it, right? And also Star Wars doesn't really double down. Star Wars also doesn't, really deal with, like, it has white America coded Luke, farm boy, Han, swashbuckler, and Leia, and whereas Riddick has non-white Vin Diesel, and it has non-white, and not just non-white but non-American coded this black actor. I can't remember his name. So Star Wars could have been counter-hegemonic. When I say, stopping, interrogate your internal stormtrooper with Excel spreadsheet characteristics as a Facebook programmer, as a accountant for Apple, right? As a graduate of Harvard, interrogate your internal stormtrooper. Now I'm pushing very far. The film itself does not, to me, it could be a reading of, Return of the Jedi is actually a discursive cinematic encryption of the Vietnamese, and it's about the Vietnamese as the Ewoks struggling against Lucas didn't say that till 2004, way late to the game. Also, that is not nobody reads it as that in America. If it did, America would not have, Rotten Tomatoes would be giving all the Star Wars, and America would be giving the military industrial complex entertainment arm would not be giving Lucas billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, right? It's because Star Wars was read as Cold War anti-communism. And that's an important thing to note, and we're going to talk about that later today. How you code, right, the characters when they're in alien races and fantasy races and sci-fi, and how to, you know, in that discussion I would argue Star Wars is a failure to do that. And Silver Spook, I have to actively read really hard all these things into it. And I do that because every American knows Star Wars and every Westerner knows Star Wars. And so I can instantly say things like, well, the U.S. military is the Empire, and all of its aircraft carriers are Star Destroyers, and all the Marines are Stormtroopers, and the DC is the literal Death Star, and the weapons of mass financial destruction are the ion cannon that it shoots into Venezuelan transactions so that they can't get any medicine, and 40,000 people die from lack of healthcare in Latin American country X, right? But that's really active reading I have to do. That's really reading hard into it, right? But the West did not interpret it that way, you know. And so, you know, so a lot of this is subjective because, like, well, what is interpreted where? But I think it's clear if a population mass interprets something one way, like something like Sorry to Bother You. Now, it's possible that you make a movie and then a lot of people misinterpret it, and you had an intention. But this is why another point that I make is that if you are being too off the nose is more of a problem than being too on the nose, because if you're too off the nose, if you're being too off, that's why people have said Neofeud is ham-fisted, too on the nose. Get the politics out of my video games, right? Because I talk about I talk about race, class, social, political, economic inequality, the police, prison, military, industrial complex, and it's very in your face, right? Americans and Westerners are pretty dense when it comes to figuring things out, like how to deal with COVID-19, how to wear a mask. Half the country still can't figure that out, and we're supposedly out of the pandemic. You're not out of the pandemic. You still got half the country not getting vaccinated, and 40% of Marines. So you gotta say clearly what you mean, because of that, but also not just because of that. Also because not saying it clearly what you mean, like if you really meant Vietnam, if you really meant Star Wars as a metaphor for the Vietnam War and the resistance against the U.S. Empire by colonized peoples like the Vietnamese, if you really meant it, you should have said it more on the nose, and maybe people would have gotten it, rather than just joining the fandom menace and hating women, or just guzzling it down with a tub of popcorn and thinking nothing, and America continuing to be an imperial. If the biggest best-selling franchise of all time, one of the biggest, Star Wars, was so anti-imperial and anti-war, maybe, you know, the soft power would have changed the minds of so many people, and you wouldn't be in $21 trillion of forever war. But it was a failure. It was a total and abject failure, like every other American. Well, it's a success to propagate American militarism and imperialism, and in that sense, it's a successfully entertained a lot of people while they're guzzling their popcorn and then selling weapons and doing IT work and marketing, you know, putting LGBTQ plus stickers on the side of the CIA and on the side of a Tomahawk missile and selling them to ASPI in Australia to the Australian government, making money for Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin while they're watching Star Wars. And we watched a story about how Empire and militarized Episode 8, full of like, well, and the military makes money killing everyone in the arms dealing, it's terrible. And then you're over there arms dealing in America watching your Star Wars. Total failure of a series. If you meant to communicate anything, you didn't communicate jack shit by what the Star Wars fans, you know, are going off about. If anything, the only papers I've ever really read about Star Wars, for the most part, are about how the first one I remember in the 90s was like how Star Wars is a metaphor for why communism must be defeated. And a lot of that has to do with the way that you code the people and the characters, right? And like, well, America is not ready to make anything that doesn't have 3 white stars in it in 1978 and 1980 something. Well, I mean, that's why the Iron mask is correct, and it's the Chinese that will break their own chains, not America figuring out how to not be racist, not be capitalist, have a revolution in America, and then somehow rescue China afterward, right? This is the way that a lot of some leftists think in America that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. America will never have a revolution. America will be forced to change because other places, you know, that have historically been colonized get so good at leading with socialism, with mutual coexistence, with lack of ethnic strife, and all these other things, that America, Europe, the UK, in such abject failure, with such animosity from all these other places that they have hurt, like Africa, right? Namibia, that's why Germany, France apologizing to Rwanda and Namibia. Why for the genocide that France and Germany committed there? Why are they doing that? Because they know that the time of reckoning, that the time of the breaking of the chains of the dragon, which is who? All of China, not any mythical beast specifically, it's a metaphor. There's so much happening in this movie. It is such a good movie. Like, I really recommend anybody watch it. Not just because it's very funny. Arnold and Jackie Chan had the most fucking hilarious fight. There's one scene where Arnold, it's doing all these things at the same time. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the British prison, he's a warden. You know, this is why Iron Mask and Riddick are fucking based. It's like Riddick, right? Escape from Butcher Bay. The prison warden is like the bad guy. You know, it's comedic, but he's also like, he's fucking chaining up the central protagonist, right? And it's a prisoner. It's a prison. It's the slave catcher, right? The British, as a symbol for the slavery and colonial era, the British slave catcher, slave warden of a non-white, oppressed people, an Asian person in this case. In Riddick's case, it's Riddick, a Furian in space prisons, whether that's Crematoria, whether that's Butcher's Bay, or whatever, where the white, and it's an American cowboy coded Johns in Riddick, but in this one, right, it's a British coded, what's British, slave owning a Chinese, and that alone, that dynamic. Now in this one, it's much more funny and comedic, right? And it's not just Chinese. There's Chinese. There's Russians. There's dark. Not dark. That's what they call them. The dark people. That's what the Europeans call them. But there's brown and black people in the prison too. In the UK-led colonial slave house of nations, right? And then there's this one scene where Arnold is fighting Jackie Chan. Yeah, this is the great scene. This is my favorite scene. Is when the Chinese prisoner, like with his own like practicing and training and working through his like work and training, and you know, in martial arts specifically, but it's kind of a metaphor for the work and hard labor and fighting that the Chinese have to put into to liberate themselves from their colonial shackles. The intellectual work, physical work, and he practices and practices and practices and practices. And at the end of the film, as China itself, in the metaphor of the dragon, liberated from its quote unquote stupor, its opiate, its impoverishment, its suffering, its pestilence under a colonial extraction. And at the end, Jackie Chan, as a dragon, as the people of China liberate themselves from their oppressor of colonialism, of the hegemony of the West, Jackie Chan, the prisoner, liberates himself and shatters his own chains. It's such a powerful scene, you know. There's a lot of times I was feeling all teary and while watching it, because it's really. And if you think of it in that context, if you read it in that, I know, okay, everybody's not going to read it the same way that I read it. You might just see an action movie, and you know, it is what it is. But you know, it is such a powerful metaphor for what people in Asia, in Africa, in Central South America, across the planet, in collaboration as well. It's a very it's a collaboration between a lot of peoples, and the Russians and the Chinese are collaborating there as well. That's a part of the story. Russians and Chinese collaborating against colonial oppressors. You know, there's something happening. There's a lot happening there. Now, of course, it's Russian and Chinese based, but you know, But that is part of what has happened. Now there are other times when they have fought, and that happens too, right? It's not all buddy all the time. However, but part of why they fight is because the United States and the West sought. That's part of this is an unmentioned thing about why the Carter administration and the intelligence community and the Western ruling class of the time sought to open up China. It's not just because they wanted to give Chinese a bunch of jobs and give away now they're all whining. All the Chinese have the J-19 stealth fighter jet, and we didn't even know. We need to spy on China better. Oh my God, they're stealing all the technology. No, the West gave China technology as part of an agreement. They said, you help us make products, we'll give you some jobs, we'll sell some products back, and we'll give you some technology. That was part of the deal. But the part of the reason why the Nixon and the West opened up into China and had everything that comes out of a Walmart, made in China, was partially to benefit capitalist industries that they thought they could benefit. Chinese needed to build up economically to industrialize, right? But the West wanted to drive a wedge between Russia and China. That was part of it. And also the panda huggers, the Clintonites, in the Sergei Brezhnev, I can't remember his full name, but the Grand Chessboard, he writes about the reason why the Belt and Road Initiative and the reason why all the wars in Afghanistan and in that Central Asian supercontinent is because the U.S. and the West goal was to drive wedges and basically blockades between all the communist countries and all of the Eurasian supercontinent generally, which is part of a much longer that precedes 20th century capitalism versus communism Cold War era to deep Western versus Eastern, global North and Western versus East and Southern split and conflicts, and the realization that if the Eurasian supercontinent and the joining in with Africa through the Belt and Road Initiative were to be completed, that could spell the complete paradigm shift and the turning of the center of power of Earth away from the West, away from the sea power of the British and the sea power and the military, the Navy, the Strait of along Singapore that America continues to hold, and it will signal the end of the Western hegemonic era for the last few hundred years globally, if that is to be complete. This is why the U.S. The Biden administration is dumping $300 million plus per year, specifically only. Now this billion is going for propaganda, but $300 million specifically for countering the Belt and Road Initiative in YouTube influencers, in mainstream and social media. And the reason why is to stop China from doing what Jackie Chan's character does in The Iron Mask. From breaking their own chains, not America breaking China's chains, and it is important. There is a place for those who support indigenous people, decolonization, anti-capitalism, anti-racism, all these things in the West. But their mission is to support the end of that prisoner, right? Is to fight internally against that, the prison, the police, and the military-industrial complex as the cop, the internal cops, like literally, with Black Lives Matter and anti-racism and the carceral state, etc., inside of the United States, right? This chain holder. Again, this is why the meta story is actually counter-hegemonic, and Iron Man and nothing that's ever come out of Marvel is. At the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Falcon literally saves the police and U.S. politicians and the U.S. military. That's what he does, right? From leftists, represented by the Flag Smashers. In the Iron Mask, it's the Chinese and it's the non-white peoples liberating themselves from Western colonizer chains, not the other way around. Liberating themselves, not somebody coming in and saving them. That's an important story too, which is that it's not some heroic great power is going to come over there and save the people, right? It's the people collectively saving themselves. The Chinese people in the village that they're in, they work together with the Russians. There's so many things going on. There's so many things going on. I can't find a goddamn image of the Silk Road, which is what historically that which was connected the Eurasian supercontinent, right? God damn it! There's a scene. There's like amazing scenes where they go through all of Russia, not just Moscow. They go through Russia, and you see the countryside. You see peoples from like the Kazakh people. You see the Hui people. You see the Silk Road. You see the desert. You see Xinjiang. You see shit. They go through Xinjiang, and there are the different peoples of Russia, peoples of China. You see the similarities in their culture. They have their dances. And then they all work together to undo the duplicitous colonizer that's kind of taken over in China, you know? And it's not like Captain America comes in, liberate. It's like all the people working together. Now they do a lot of martial arts and fighting, but they all work together against the colonial oppressor. I mean, I know, you know, that it's not like literally the British army comes in and they all kick their ass. No, but it's like in the language of the film. That is ultimately the message. It's about the liberation of chained, imprisoned individuals, peoples, and entire countries enslaved and in colonization, liberating themselves by working together against a correctly pinpointed primary contradiction of Western colonialism and Western imperialism, right? With there are secondary fights. Like there's a scene where Chinese fight each other. There are Chinese that are selling out their own people. Compradors. Yes, there's a Gusano character. There's one he's really like he has a really good deal working for this imposter, right? You know, who's literally wearing other people's wearing the faces of the rightful leaders, right? The Gusanos everywhere. That's a lot of Shanghai, a lot of down Hong Kong. You got some people that are selling out to the West, you know, backing their billionaires over there, backing American policy, trying to break off Taiwan and Hong Kong that are Chinese, they're going against their own country, right? And then the two-faced people in China. It's an important subtext, and so it's not just like, well, and the only thing we have to fight is it's just that white people are bad. No, it's like there are colonial, there are colonial structures that are the greatest contradiction, and internally we have our own people that are siding with these oppressors, and we have to undo that, you know. And so that's a big part of the story by many people working together, you know. And yes, there is one leader. There's the central characters. There's a love story between the British map maker and the Asian rightful princess and this and that. But that's kind of like that. Like the map maker. This is like a Russian cover. But anyway, but that's kind of secondary to. I mean, to me, that stuff is kind of secondary to the overall structure of the film. Kind of like Riddick is about, going around and using shanks and doing martial arts and falling from the rafters and being a awesome survivor with shined eyes and fighting these huge interstellar bombing and imperial invaders, right? But the understory, what is really being said, like beneath the surface, is so much more, and so but yeah, and the fact that the Silk Road is featured is very important, like, and it shows like how this was an important pathway that linked all of our peoples in Russia, which also is a very diverse place with many different peoples, right? It's not just Moscow. It's not just St. Petersburg. It's not just a handful of painters and Tchaikovsky over there. There's like all these other peoples, And then when you get into China, it's not just the Han Chinese. There's they go through and they see a variety of different peoples, and with different styles of martial arts and different styles of dress and such, and at the end of the day, anyway, so I've gone over that a lot. So, starting to lose my train of thought, but I feel like that it's a film that could not be made in the West. It could not be made in the Imperial Metropole. It's 1 o'clock. I gotta get off. It's a film that I highly recommend. That was the one thing I want to say. Arnold Schwarzenegger is with Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan and Arnold are fighting, right? It's the slave. It's the British Western slave master fighting the enslaved Chinese prisoner, and then they're like fighting, and it's a very good. Just in terms of the action and the fighting, that one's very good. Well, it's very well done. And Jackie Chan is a very good comedic martial artist. It's very entertaining, an acrobatic martial artist. And then there's one scene where Arnold Schwarzenegger is like, he has all of these, kind of like the scene in Black Panther where he's got all of these things that he's stolen from around the world. Like, oh, that's the sword. That's the helmet of Alexander. Oh, that's the sword of the great Turkish Tsar. This is the helmet of Genghis Khan, and this is the shield of, this is Excalibur. He's got all of these artifacts from all around the world, right? This is I don't know, the spear of this great Zulu prince. He's got all of this artifacts from the colonial era, and kind of as a museum curatorial. It's kind of museums in the West are kind of, they're like amber preserved depictions, not necessarily of the cultures that the British stole the object from, but they're amber preserved depictions of the height of European hegemony and colonial horror. Like, look at all these people that we killed, destroyed, and stole all their things of, and we misunderstood, including the Iroquois. So in that scene, Arnold is like bragging about all of his beautiful artifacts that he has, right? And he's like, this is the helmet of Genghis Khan, and he shows him the helmet, and Jackie Chan's like, that's not a helmet, that's an incense pot, or that's an incense holder, and he like flips it upside down. And the British like not knowing what they're doing, but coming up with all these great theories about what they are, right? Oh, look, this is my Just So story, and who's to question it? Well, I am a very important British Oxbridge graduate, just like Horace Greeley, and Voltaire in France, and Marx and Kropotkin, and you will listen to my Just So story, and you will buy my book, and you will look at my museum artifact, and give me my fancy six-figure salary as a university curator, or you will have your head removed from your body. Anyway, so it's like, but it's kind of calls bullshit. It's like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. It's kind of like the Chinese person tells the British, you don't even know what that artifact that you stole from us that you're looking at. And also, so Arno is like, no, you can't use that because that's Genghis Khan's. Oh, you can't use that because that's King Arthur. Oh, that's the Persian emperors. Oh no, that's the great, that's the chalice. That's the goblet of eternal life. That's the what is it? The goblet of fire, not the goblet of fire. The fucking fountain of eternal youth goblet. That's Jesus's cup. You can't take that. You can't fight me with that. And so Jackie Chan's like, what am I supposed to fight you with then? Every one of these things is some precious object. So Arnold has his sword, and he's like, well, I'll put my sword down. And he's like, okay, that's fair. Anyway, so like there's a lot of like comedic stuff in it, on top of it being there's a lot of action. And then under it, again, whatever the entertainment value, the comedy value, the action value, the cinematography value, the spectacle value, the witty screenwriting value, the politics and the importance of what in my mind is the counter-hegemonic aspects. Now, if you are pro imperialism and capitalism, then you're gonna like, this is a terrible movie on political, in terms of political message and moving of people's minds. But to my mind, it has a very important. It is an example of what to do in cinema, Now, and I don't think it's a mistake that it's not coming out of the Western countries. And it is not exclusively from one country, right? Pacific Rim is one that technically has Guillermo del Toro, but Pacific Rim is also an international. It's international. Many people coming together to fight against, and I think it's another more counter-hegemonic film. But it's not headquartered in the United States. It actually has a diverse array, not just of people in America, not just, well, we got a black Falcon, we got a black Captain America, we're diverse now. No, that's we don't need another Obama. We don't need another Gusano Asian or Gusano like Kamala Harris. I'm Asian. It's AAPI month. Come watch my Kamala Harris panel. We don't need another Gusano Asian or Gusano sellout Obama to his own peoples. Black people got worse off in his time. Poor, incarcerated, killed by police. Bomb more non-white people across the world with drone bombings 10 times more than his previous president. That's not counter hegemonic. Just having a black character in a film. Not to say there's something wrong with that. That's better in terms of like seeing more black faces, but black faces in high places, that's not a solution. Ask the black people of the United States how that's worked out for them. They will say, generally speaking, this has not worked out very well. And so that's not counter hegemonic. Now, what is counter hegemonic is to have the story of the black people, the African people in the United States told. You know, in that sense, the Iron Mask is more of a story of what it's like for a lot of not just for Asian people, but for a lot of colonized people, including African people, than anything that ever come out of Marvel. No matter how many black Falcons and how many black Captain Americas and how many black military-industrial complex beneficiaries like War Machine you put in, the story that they call it paint bucket representation, right? Just take a white story and throw black paint all over them. Take a white story, throw yellow paint all over them. Oh, there you go, Asian representation. Take a white story about capitalist success, and then throw LGBTQ plus rainbow paint on. Oh, more gay war criminals. You see. Now we have a gay Captain Marvel, woman Captain Marvel, right? That means that that's not the story necessarily. That's not you have to have the story and the history of those people, right? Not just like take a black person and put them in the story that is still made by, for, and of whiteness in the West. And so that's why Iron Mask is not just yellow paint on a white story. It's not just, non-white paint on a white story. It's not just Eastern paint on a white story. It's an Eastern story. It's a story of Chinese peoples, their actual struggles. Not like, oh, it's so hard to be a model minority going to NYU and being overrepresented in universities and then in Wall Street banks, despite that Chinese people are actually, they're actually the most likely to be in poverty. When you count the cost of living in the cities that they all live in, the most expensive, 1/3 of all Chinese people live in New York and San Francisco and like one other city, is like they're actually the most likely to be in poverty. That's not the Chinese struggle as how to be a model minority. The Chinese struggle is how we get liberated from this global imperialist and super racist America. That's the Chinese story. That's the Asian story. I mean, that's the big part of it. And I say that as somebody who's part Asian. That's my grandma's. How do I not get interned? How do I not go into a concentration camp for my eyes looking quote unquote slitty and being a quote unquote Jap? I know those are both slurs. That's this Asian story. Not how do I be a model minority. Oh, it's so hard to have to go to Starbucks and have $20 latte. No, that's not. That's a handful of Gusano time. That's the puppet. The people who sold out China and put on the second face. In some of them very rich from Taiwan and Southeast China, they got out and then they worked for the Epoch Times and the CIA. Like Asian NPCs, some of the Twitter user who talks a lot about this, his father worked for the intelligence community, but that's not the Asian experience for most of them. Just like the black experience is not being a Kanye West or being Falcon or Black Captain. That's not their experience. Their experience is getting shot in the ghetto by white cops. Their experience is going to prison forever and never seeing their children again. Their experience is dying from poisoned water in Flint and their children getting brain damage. That's the experience. And so a counter-hegemonic film is Sorry to Bother You, which is about this is what it's like to be black in Oakland. It's called Homeless 10 Cities. And also this is like what it's like to be in America. It's full of homeless 10 cities. Also, there's Asians and black people getting together to undo white capitalism under Steve Lift. Anyway, so that's the closest thing to a counter-hegemonic American made in America film is that I can think of is like Sorry to Bother You. But in my mind, like there are other films that are outside of America that are far better in that sense. Now, Sorry to Bother You is a very important film for people inside of the United States, in a lot of ways. But anyway, I've said enough words for today. I gotta get off because I gotta come back and stream again. I gotta be streaming all day. I gotta get off. Thanks a lot to speaking of Rutger Hauer, I was watching Blade Runner again last week. That film is like a fine wine. It's aged gracefully. Yeah, Blade Runner is a good film. You know, I highly recommend it. You know, of course, you know, as I say, like when I'm saying is it good or not, I'm talking. I like to differentiate between entertaining, right? How well written. What does that even mean, though? How entertaining is it? You know, is it like a movie that is very, you know, you just kind of want to relax it, and is it funny? How's the action, the acting? You know, and the truth is, for just blockbuster movies where you don't want to think a lot, it doesn't really matter how the acting is, right? So I would say that like that's the entertainment value along those different rubrics is separate from the political content and the soft power and hegemonic or counter-hegemonic consciousness raising and building within that film or movie or game or TV show or book or whatever, right? And so in that realm, Iron Mask, in terms of like just pure entertainment value, it's at least as good as any Marvel movie, any Star Wars. You know, it's dubbed. You know, you don't have to watch it all necessarily in language. People are speaking many different languages in it. That's another thing that makes it counter-hegemonic. People are speaking Russian and Chinese and different dialects. Some people are speaking English, but like it's got a variety of languages from all different places in the world. You know, and you know, and every Westerner isn't super dehumanized, like, or made to be the super bad guy. Like there is a sympathetic British mapmaker character, you know, probably getting even more. George Washington was also a mapmaker kind of character. So it's a movie that's not necessarily like it's not all one-sided, you know, in that way. But it is honest in the ways where it's important to be honest, you know. It is nuanced and but honest in the biggest and most important ways. Whereas Western movies they're not all one-sided, but they are giant lies and hegemonic in the most important places, which is like, anyway, I've gone on for that long enough. So, highly recommended. And if you have a second to leave even a very short review, check out this counter-hegemonic game. It's called Neofeud. Neofeud is a cyberpunk adventure game that I created. Dystopic cyberpunk adventure game in the vein of Blade Runner, with an overlay of Game of Thrones-like political intrigue. It is a game that can be found on Steam and itch.io. It is on sale right now for only the next couple days, so do pick it up soon. Everything that we do here is supported by sales of Neofeud, as well as some Patreon money in terms of making these streams. So if you value the streams, if you found this worth your watch, consider picking up Neofeud and just giving it to somebody that will spread some class and anti-colonial and anti-racist consciousness, because Neofeud is a game that calls out all of these things more directly than most things that I've ever encountered. It's a game. It's like it's like a video game version of a Silver Spook, not rant, a Silver Spook high decibel passionate education video. And so Neofeud is something that you can find on Steam and you can find it on itch. It is on sale. Even if you can leave a very short review, like great game, I enjoyed playing it, that really does help us to increase the likelihood that Neofeud will be discovered in the more like this, in the other algorithms when people are browsing Steam. So consider leaving a very short review or a longer review if you have the time to do that, or become a patron and, you know, give some reparations to colonized indigenous people trying to make anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-imperialist games and educational streams, and pay me for some of the work that I do. If you have $1, if you don't have any money, I mean, I'm sorry that you're like a rural farmer in still colonized India that doesn't have the level of liberation that China has had, but or Brazil, which sadly has a lot of people that need help. So don't starve if you are a Brazilian making like $3 a day or something. But if you have some money and you can support us, it really does help, because we do need to pay for the internet, the electricity, keep the house and the vehicles running so we can get the food to our house, to keep the food and the children that Holly and I have, and on the decolonizing parts of illegally occupied by the U.S. empire in Hawaii here. Anyways, you also get access, of course, when you become a Patreon. You get access to the Silver Spook. You get access when you become a patron to the Silver Spook Discord, of course. So if you want to hang out and talk to people in the Silver Spook community, and have a little more access to things that other people don't with regards to Silver Spook's content, then check that out and become a Patreon. You can also find Neofeud on itch.io for Mac and Linux as well as Windows, and it is a game that is on sale there as well. You can get it DRM free. A slightly higher portion of the revenue does go to me, so if you really want a maximum revenue going to me, then you can get it on itch.io. You can also give a tip at any amount, so it does increase the total amount that you can give. On itch.io, you can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Neofeud, where you can become a Patreon patron. Thank you. Somebody just became a Patreon patron, so thanks a lot to whoever just did that. That was Philip Dodson. Thanks a lot to Philip Dodson. Dodson! We got Dodson here! See, nobody cares. No, I care. I care. I care. I don't care if Jeff Goldblum and, you know, that other guy who's British in Jurassic Park don't care. I care that we have Dodson. We have, I'm just joking. That's not the Dodson. I know that's not the Dodsons that we're looking for. That's the Dodson from Jurassic Park. I'm joking. But we have, thank you very much to Philip Dodson for becoming a Patreon supporter. Philip Dodson. Okay. Thanks a lot to Philip Dodson, Dave James Wheaton, Mixzilla, Mr. Brewer, Kyle Rapp, Belinda Ann Taylor, Kiara Kapabar, Maxine Bolo, Industrial Robot, Johnny C, Alana Montero, Sean Conlon, Danny Carroll, Eric Wright, Jared Morgan, Swancroft, The Reaver, Tyler Tuthill, Rifle 55, Matthew Stone, Alexander Roy Gabriel House, Alfonso De Lazar, Combo Breaker, Lark, Muriel, Skylar Smith, Tim Smith, Philip Dodson, Tim Kabutazux Raff, Tiny Earl, Michael McAllister, Extremely Online Left, Charlington Beastcoat, The Name, Adam M. Smith, Matthew Cabrera, J. Owen, Sean Lynch, Josie Antonio Hernandez, Mass Casualty, Ro, Quinn, Rust, and Brendan Long. Thank you to all of these patrons for your continued support. It does really help out a lot to make sure that we can keep on doing what we do here at the Silver Spook Games in terms of education, making Neofeud 2, making Terminus Cyberstar, and all the other things that we do. And make sure everybody can like have healthcare and housing and food and stuff while we do that. You can also follow us at Silver Spook Games at octodon.social. This is Mastodon, which is a decentralized, non-capitalist controlled social media platform like Twitter, but without a billionaire, hegemonic, military and Wall Street backed sequence of information and disinformation spewing from the mouths of blue check marks like Twitter. So Mastodon is like decentralized Twitter. However, while we have access to the higher reach Death Star satellites, you can also follow at Silver Spook Guy on Twitter. You can also follow for the games related stuff at Silver Spook Games minus the E in silver. Silver Spook Games, because the E in silver was taken by the British in the auspices of Arnold Schwarzenegger and put in a prison in London, along with Jackie Chan and the Chinese people generally. So that's where the E went. Somebody keeps asking, where's the E in silver? Where's the E in silver? Well, colonialism stole the E and put it in prison with Jackie Chan in the Iron Mask. That's where the E is. He's like he's doing backflips, trying to break his chains somewhere in a prison in London for the last 150 years. You can also follow at Terminus C, which is a low-poly cyberpunk immersive sim in the vein of late 90s PC games like Deus Ex 1 and System Shock 2. Terminus Cyberstar is a game that's being, I'm the content director, lead writer, essentially, and it is a game being made by myself and a handful of other folks. It is a counter-hegemonic game as well. Because I only make counter-hegemonic games, I don't make hegemon games. What do I look like? Do I look like a green rectilinear Pokemon dancing in front of a palace at Versailles? Am I a hedge? Am I a hedge maze mon? I am not a hegemon. I don't make hegemonic films. I only make films that are about setting little green rectilinear Pokemon on fire. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what counter hegemony means. Fighting against the colonial and imperial power. But anyway, I only make counter hegemonic games, and that includes this one. It is a game in which you play a similar to Riddick. You play a prisoner in a former caged person in an ICE concentration camp, and I'm talking about the borders at the U.S. southern border, where they keep Hispanic people in little cages and children where they die routinely of treatable illnesses. in customs and border enforcement. And so the main character in this game is somebody who escaped the concentration camp of the United States, and is trying to survive a CCTV and panopticon, and trying not to get caught, and trying not to die, being caught by police or ICE, and surviving in this cyberpunk hell world that is like America, but slightly different. But it's basically space US. Anyways, so this is a game that is currently in development. It's not out yet. It's gonna come soon. If you want to find out when it comes out, I recommend you follow at Terminus C so that you get a notification when this game does get released and updates on it as well. You can join the Discord as well, right there. Anyway, okay, it's 1:21. I gotta get out of here. So, again, I will be back at 7 o'clock Pacific time on Twitch. Not here, on Twitch, for the decolonizing space, sci-fi, and reality panel with a bunch of other content creators from across the world, indigenous creators, Asian Pacific Islander, African, and other creators from around the world. We'll be talking about that topic. And yeah. Until next time, keep your mirror shades polished. Be excellent to each other. Thanks a lot, Holly, for the modding, and everybody for watching. Be excellent to each other, and make your best counter-hegemonic games and films, and tell your friends about them, and books and RPGs and other content, etc. And let's all break your mental, free your mind, like Neo. And realize that that's also a counter-hegemonic film about the global south. Actually, that's what Zion is. And free your mind and break your mental chains, your literal physical chains, particularly if you're in prison of the United States, and your collective colonial chains, particularly if you are in a place like a colonized country of the West. All right, take it easy.